In Luke chapter 7, Jesus goes to Capernaum, and while he is there, the servant of a centurion is about to die from sickness. The centurion sends the Jewish elders to Jesus to ask him to come heal his servant. The elders try to convince Jesus to come by telling him about all the wonderful things the centurion has done for the local Jews, including building their synagogue. As Jesus is on his way, the centurion sends some of his friends to tell him to not bother coming over because he realizes he doesn't deserve to have Jesus as a guest. He adds that this is why he sent messengers in the first place, because he did not consider himself worthy of speaking to Jesus himself. He tells Jesus to just say the word and the servant will be healed, adding that as one who has great authority, he can recognize someone who has even greater authority. When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him, and turning to the crowd following him, he said, "I tell you, I have not found such great faith even in Israel." Then the men who had been sent returned to the house and found the servant well. Soon afterward, Jesus went to a town named Nain, and when he arrived, a funeral procession was coming out of the gate. A young man had died, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and a large crowd from the town was with her. Jesus told her not to weep, and then he raised her son from the dead. The raising of the son of the widow of Zarephath by the Old Testament prophet Elijah is the model for this miracle. At the beginning of both stories, the prophet meets the woman at the gate of the town, and both stories end with the words, "And he gave the boy back to his mother." We then hear about how John the Baptist begins to question whether or not Jesus is the one, and also how the Pharisees rejected the baptism of John, and because of this they also rejected the teaching of Jesus. Jesus is eating dinner at the house of a Pharisee named Simon when a sinful woman arrives with an expensive jar of perfume. She stood behind Jesus weeping and letting her tears drip on his feet. She then wipes off the tears with her hair, kisses his feet, and pours the perfume on them. Jesus' host sees this and mutters to himself. Jesus then tells him a parable and says that whoever has been forgiven little loves little, but that this woman loves much because he has forgiven her sins. And the people are scandalized when they hear this. Jesus then tells them the well-known parable of the sower. Before telling Jesus' parable of the sower, Luke tells us about Jesus' other disciples, his female disciples. We also learn that Herod wants Jesus killed because Jesus is proclaiming a kingdom other than Herod's, and that makes Jesus a threat. But Jesus is able to travel around giving this message because there are a group of women disciples who travel with him and pay his bills, including a woman named Joanna, whose husband just happens to be the household manager for Herod. Herod, in other words, ends up indirectly funding the very thing he's trying to stamp out. Another odd little fact about this arrangement is that a lot of the funding being used to support Jesus' ministry came from money earned by Herod's monopoly on the aphrodisiac market, but that's beside the point. Jesus then tells another parable about a lamp on a stand, and we see his mother and brothers show up to try to take him back home because they think he's lost his mind. And Jesus says that his true family are the ones surrounding him who actually listen to him. We then see the story of Jesus calming the storm while crossing the lake with his disciples, and on the other side of the lake, Jesus restores a demon-possessed man. After this, Jesus returns and raises a dead girl and heals a sick woman. Jesus then sends out the 12 disciples to go prepare other towns for his arrival and message. Jesus later feeds the 5,000 people with just a couple of fish and some pieces of bread, soon after which Peter declares that Jesus is the Messiah. But then Jesus starts to predict his death, and Peter doesn't like that so much. Luke then tells us about how Jesus took Peter, James, and John up a mountain and how Jesus' appearance was transfigured before them, and then Moses and Elijah suddenly appear and Jesus has a conversation with them about his departure. Peter is in awe and he starts babbling as usual, and God's voice speaks and tells him to listen to Jesus. At the bottom of the mountain, Jesus heals a demon-possessed boy, and he then predicts his death a second time.